decentralization towards a sort of a 40-50% dependence on fossil fuels and moving towards renewables is absolutely necessary, but also central. And for example, agriculture, just by India shifting towards legumes, we will use less of carbon-based fuels. And that's not only good for the ecology and less energy use, but it's very good for our health, fundamentally. So the more we reduce, so right now we have 1 rupee rice subsidies paying for refined rice, while as our dal is $85, and in some cases where the middlemen hoard all these, and it goes up to 250 rupees. So how can we manage health? So we need to bring this balance of the legume system well integrated so that we address economic issues and fundamental issues. And therefore, the integration is very critical. So therefore, water issues, and I'll give you a good example of water issues. Today, to grow 1 kilogram of rice in India, we need 5,000 liters of water. So I have a young classmate of mine in University of Agriculture Sciences, Bangalore, who now is developing technologies where he already has varieties where 1 kg of rice can be grown by 2,900 liters of water, 40% reduction. This is remarkable. So this water conservation will be a very great challenge, not just for India, but globally. So the point here I'm making is the food security, health, energy challenges, they're all interconnected. So where we solve one problem, we need to solve into the other. And this is called systems-based logic. That means as we look at the whole of our solutions, whole of the planet, there are some critical control points. So if we move away from carbon fuel, it'll help public health. If we move away from carbon fuels, it'll help environmental consequences. So by finding control points of the overall systems that is in equilibrium, we'll better formulate our solutions. So as we go forward, as you go into the innovation economy, developing your thesis and hypothesis based on control points that holds the system will be the driver of your innovation. So any country that can innovate based on systems logic will be most successful and will get the ultimate solutions for the challenges we face. And therefore, we need a systems-based approach, and as complex biological systems have evolved over 3 billion years, the control systems of the overall web of life is very central, because ultimately we are balanced between the ecosystem and the biological cells that are in the ecosystem. And then we are using this human mind to play with it and play with it destructively. And then we build technological solution at the other end. So between these 4 pillars of the ecosystem, the cellular systems that are in it, and the human mind that is working on it to build all these tools, we have to find some sort of a balance. So this balance is the basis of innovation economy, is how equilibrium will be maintained between the biological entities in the ecosystem and the human mind that works with it, and what are the technological tools that we are going to innovate with, from silicon to the carbon. So with that in mind, as these emergent properties are irreducible, we have to find the system solution. Oops. So if you look at the food security challenges, it's not just about the food distribution feeding the hungry, but it's also about the excess calories causing the obesity crisis. And more importantly, all this has to be managed with the climate resilience in mind, because we are clearly going into this 0.05% carbon to 0.04%, and even with all the climate change treaties that we may come across, we will still have some 3.38. So that's the reality, and that means we have to have climate resilient crop production system. And one of the key antidotes of this crop system is the fruits and vegetables and beans and legumes that have to be preserved. So food safety and preservation is very central, because half the food we produce, especially half the food that can prevent these chronic diseases and can give the micronutrients for feeding the world nutritional challenges, have to be preserved. And so this needs to be addressed, and is one of the key pillars of the global food security challenges, is preventing waste of high water containing foods that are consumed with low temperature preservation technologies. Okay. So with that in mind, we have these 4 pillars. So this is the foundation of the technology platform. And as we look at the population of the world, we need to address the needs of 12 billion people on this planet. So with this platform, we are in a systems-based innovation platform. And among the critical systems platform that I want to talk to you about today is that we human beings, which are eukaryotic cells, we are product of our prokaryotic history. So even today, even in our own body, we have 1-to-1 ratio across our body of our prokaryotic history. And in our gut system, we have more prokaryote that sustains us than our own cells. Okay? So this is a reality. And this is so in the soil. We have destroyed our soil biology by over-dependence on chemical fertilizers. We still need chemical fertilizers, but these chemical fertilizers have to be in harmony with the sustainable soil biology. So this microbiome will give us better crop system, sustainable crop system, will give us better healthy plants and animals because they are products of the same prokaryotic history. And it'll give us better health. So a systems platform based on our prokaryotic history of this planet is absolutely necessary to be integrated into an innovation platform. So that is the equilibrium I'm talking about between the ecosystem and the cellular system. We have to look at the web of life and the cellular system that are already been there, created on this planet for over 3 billion plus years. The life of this planet is about 4.6 billion. We still have about 4.4 billion more to go until our sun dies out, right? But until then, we have our history of our life systems. So history of the life system is what built our system. So this needs to be a critical part of the innovation we advance, is our prokaryotic history. So this part of systems innovation is very central, and therefore we are in a post-genome integrated biology, where systems is not just about the individual component of a cellular system like genomes or the mRNA or the transcripts or the proteins that they code for or the metabolic products that they enrich. But a cellular system is a product of our ecology. And what is that ecology? Carbon fixation, carbon being hydrated. Solar energy is captured by splitting of water, and the plants so elegantly capture this solar energy into a chemical form. So carbohydrate, carbon being hydrated, right? Carbohydrate. From carbohydrate, we get lipids, and from lipid, we get the nitrogen incorporation into it. We get the amino acids. That's protein. So here's our macronutrients. And then we have the micronutrients to make the cellular system work well. So we need to go beyond the components of a system, but we must go then to the cellular system that are tuned in with this carbon fixation strategy. So all our cellular system is based on carbon fixation, carbon and water and nitrogen. Those are the basic elements. And then ultimately it's the oxygen. So we worry about what we eat, but we forget all the breakdown happens when the oxygen is inefficiently captured in our cellular system. So all the major chronic diseases, all the breakdown in sanitation, all is based on where the oxygen interface is destroyed. So we need to incorporate this. So we are product of our geology. We are product of our ecosystem. So the three gases and water defines all the biological system, okay, including our anaerobic ancestors. Okay. So this systems-based approach is very efficient, very necessary as we look at this diet-linked chronic disease. So with the systems approach, where the control points that manage the system is very important for hypothesis, deriving a hypothesis. So we have taken this rationale, and with this we ask the right question. We don't ask arbitrary question. What is holding a system together? What is holding the equilibrium? Why are we getting diabetes? Why are we getting heart diseases? Why is the soil ecology breaking? Why are we getting dead zones in different parts of the world? Why is Punjab becoming more saline? Yeah? Why is biology? So we need to ask this right question and ask, why is the system broken? And that should be the basis of a hypothesis for solutions, or even for the grand challenge from which you have a better hypothesis to solve a problem. So with this type of systems approach, we look at global challenges, and we have taken this to our nutritional challenges, so nutritional and public health challenges. So if you look at our food today, we have macronutrients, carbohydrate, protein, lipids, and micronutrients, vitamins and minerals, and of course water. So if you look at it on a food label, that's all there is, okay? But that's great, and I'm not saying that's bad at all. We need all of this in adequate amounts. But what is really critical is when we get too much of hyper-processed carbohydrate, when we don't exercise, sit behind the TV, right? What happens? That carbohydrate goes to lipids, yeah? And very soon, so our oxygen efficiency is broken down. So when we have too much carbohydrates, or when it's complicated with too much alcohol, we get fatty liver, and so we have a burden of redox breakdown at our cellular system that first starts towards the diabetes breakdown, okay? Then the second, the protective elements against these challenges, we have stripped it out. So what do? We strip out all the protective elements that can counter the oxygen malfunction that's there in the plant. And then we make nice potato chip with nice oil. We lard white rice, and we get all these hyper-processed food and eat it in a sedentary life, okay? And so what happens? Our whole food profiles that are protective are stripped out, and we are eating hyper-processed carbohydrates and lipids on a very high scale at a time we are not exercising, okay? So we are burdened with stripping away of whole foods towards the hyper-processed food, and therefore your mitochondrial function, your first defense towards managing this, your insulin system, very soon has to work on overdrive and breaks down quickly, okay? So further, while we feed this hyper-processed food, many of the oligosaccharides and the good compounds that are there in whole foods, they're not feeding our good bacteria, right? So including mine. And so feeding this good bacteria is very necessary from high fiber foods, legumes, fruits and vegetables, whole grain foods. We are stripping them. So our current food system is devoid of these three strategies that we need to correct. And these needs to be corrected from the foundation of our food diversity in different ecosystems. The food diversity developed in different ecologies for different people who are adapted differently. So we need examples of all those examples to address the oxygen malfunction breakdown from our hyper-processed foods. It's great to have narrow choice of food to get enough foods, but when you get too much of that, we have breakdown on these 4 levels. We need to eat more fruits and vegetables, and 50% of that are perishable. So we need to correct that. That's where we get the whole food profiles along to counter some of the malfunctions. And third, the microbiome has to be fed, and so we don't need beyond the macronutrients, so these bioactive oligosaccharides and other nutritional components. So these needs to be approached, and therefore by taking a systems approach, we can see the control points of where our failure is. So as we look at these failures, we now need to develop a more rational food design based on the oxygen function, not just how the food is produced from carbon fixation, which is carbon being hydrated and then nitrogen from the environment being added to it in a biological way, but more importantly, how we breathe. So how we breathe, the plants have given us good solutions because they had to adapt in different ecologies and have found countermeasures to the oxygen malfunction. Because even though they are autotrophic, they also have to live in the oxygen function to derive the energy from the foods that they make. Okay, so the grain reserves are channeled, and the nutrient reserves are channeled from the leaf. So as we look into that, the solutions for our problem are already in nature, and therefore we need to get the soil biology, plant biology framework to human health framework. So we have developed a vision all the way from soil health to public health. So integrating this vision in a more systems logic, by looking at the control points that have broken our equilibrium, we can find better solutions, better hypotheses, better targeted solutions. So this should be the foundation that drives us, because we cannot run away from our ecology on this planet. As long as you want to live on this planet, you have to follow the rules of the planet. So if you don't follow the rules of the planet, the system will break down. So we will break down. So with that in mind, we have now looked at nutrigenomics and strategies, not only as a gene function, but also a metabolic balancing function, and more so a control point based on the oxygen function with redox balancing whole foods coupled into the microbiome. So when we look at that, it's the metabolic interface with the environment, the diet being the environment. We get the diet only from the environment, not from our grocery store. We get the diet from the environment, and then the metabolic interface of the cellular systems to that environment needs to be good. So gene expression is a part of it, signal transduction is a part of it, but the control point holding that metabolism is central, and we are very quickly realizing that the diabetes system can break down first, because we have to eat carbohydrates and related components every day, and obviously that's going to wear out quicker when we have imbalance. So as we look at this ecological base for metabolic breakdown, we get better defined hypothesis into our system. Therefore, we see that the systems approach needs an eco-evolutionary strategy where we human beings have evolved in different parts. And therefore, by considering that, we can correct our defects because the genomes are plastic. For example, the Japanese who live in Japan, they have an array of very diverse foods, particularly in the poorer parts of southern Japan, they live longer. But the minute they go to Hawaii and North America, they equalize their prostate and breast cancer rates to the heterogeneous population. So what does they say? The genome adapts to the new situation and they get the new disease. And same thing, South Asians, who are, because of our traditional diet being heavily carbohydrate dense, the minute we are living sedentary life and minute we go into North American populations, or even British particularly populations, we get a lot of these hidden sugars. We think we are eating orange juice, but there's a lot of added sugars there, right? So we are eating these hidden calories, and if you have liking for cola, you're in deeper trouble because one can of soda can give you 40 grams of sugar that you don't need, right? So we are burdened with these hidden sugar. Therefore, our propensity towards chronic disease is very high, and you can now see that whole system come back here as we have gone into food processing, into a very narrow choice of foods. And if we are burdened with poverty and you're living in the urban slums and getting 1 rupee rice, a 200 ml Coca-Cola, I wouldn't want to only blame Coca-Cola, but all the colas that we see, with one bottle having 40 grams of sugar, it's available for 8 rupees, yeah, even less, yeah. So we are now suddenly burdened with all of this. No wonder we have a system breakdown. So our genes adapt, our systems breaks down, and the more poor we are, the more propensity, and this is a global challenge. The more poor we are, we get these subsidized foods at a very cheap, hyper-processed state, okay? Because easy to process a narrow choice of food in mass production systems. Yeah, that's the nature of technology. That is good to a point, but you can see the breakdown rapidly, especially in urban India, okay? And especially urban South India, more so, okay? So we see this problem. I have seen it in Bangalore particularly, and you can see. So this, ultimately, it's the mitochondria and the ability of the mitochondria to interface with the protective pathway through the pentose phosphate pathway is where the critical control point at the cellular level is. So we need to identify the control points of the ecosystem at the cellular levels, and not only how cellular biology and the ecosystem components of the cellular system interact with each other, plant, microbe, how plant comes into our ecology, how does it feed animals. So I'm not saying we should be pure vegetarians, but when we eat all the food, we need to have a balanced food, and even when we eat eggs or milk or meat, we need to see that the ecology should also be sustainable in the animal production system because they are also part of the same ecology. So even we need to take care of the microbiome of the chicken that lays the egg, the microbiome of the forestomach of the cow that gives us milk. Okay, so we have to integrate all of these elements, and therefore we need a more systems-based approach. And food is a combinatorial profile. We're not eating chemicals. We're eating whole foods that have different chemical components that have ecological relevance in terms of how that plant developed. So that logic needs to be flowing back in. And therefore, plants have many compounds in different ecologies to do the same function. So to protect against oxygen, there are 8,000 plus compounds that we know of, all doing the same function in different proportion, because these plants had to evolve their flower or a seed in different ecologies for reproductive function or stress adaptation. So as we look into the ecology, we get these common control points for the same function. So this diversity is very necessary, and this diversity needs to be brought in from a biochemical logic. So using this biochemical logic in terms of solution, in my laboratory, we have found that the mitochondria, which generates the energy from the foods that we eat, ultimately the NADH, and how that interfaces with the generation of energy and also shuttle some of the energy towards the protective pentose phosphate pathway. Because if the cell has to readjust the energy, it needs to make what we call sugar phosphates and phosphorylated reductants to make new compounds to adjust to many stresses it faces. So as it adjusts, we need to channel all the energy. We cannot let the mitochondria on overdrive and fail, because the last step of the oxygen coupling at the energy generation system fails. Then you have the free radicals emerging from the oxygen, because oxygen is wonderful, but yet it's very toxic because it has 6 electrons on the outer shell. So it's constantly trying to stabilize to 8 electrons by covalent linkage. So it's always going to have tendencies for failure. Sometimes it'll have 9, sometimes it'll have 7. So it creates all sorts of superradicals by itself and when it combines with other atoms. Right? So this covalent linkage of the oxygen at the mitochondrial level with a central control point of breakdown, because we are breathing oxygen, right? Without oxygen, that's why our nose is there for. So if we dig that, we see that these countermeasures are necessary, and these countermeasures not only directly scavenge many of the requirements of protecting the components of our cellular system, but they work with the enzymatic system and protect key functions, regulatory functions across our cellular system. So having this redox protective compounds in food that can then also have components that better manage specific steps, our inflammatory steps or our cancer suppression steps, or steps that are important in the digestive pathways. All of these different steps that are important for metabolic function can have key antidotes of specific management from the food. So we not only need to have the oxygen protective elements, but we need to have inhibitory control points from our food, and this can be achieved. So our search is, why don't we have the food that we regularly eat help us with our protective elements in our food system? And our history is rich of this. Our cultural history is rich of it. So don't run away from your culture from where you came from. So bring that into your food system, but integrate modern science into it, the modern understanding of it. We should not run away from our cultural history. So culture can have better scientific framework because science is evolving. But culture is ours. Culture is each one of yours. So those should be sustained because that is sustainable. That gives you resilience. That gives you adaptability. So it won't break down that easily because it's in your own ecosystem. So that is the message here. We need to find control points, and from the control points, get the most advanced science possible to advance solutions to the challenges we face. And this is a global phenomenon. We need local solutions to global challenges. That is very important, and is one of the biggest lessons. I'm a big fan of Gandhian rural development. But Gandhian rural development and remaining of a rural environment is absolutely necessary for India's survival and resilience. And food system and food security is important, and we can bring the best science to it, best technology to it, best digital components to it, the best of everything. But we need to take care of the ecology, and here is why, and here's the biochemical rationale for that. So as we go, the fine-tuning at the oxygen biology is very central. So as our land plants evolved on the planet, we cannot run away from it. So this 2.3 million years of our journey out of Africa and many other primate journey out of Africa, we cannot run away from our oxygen biology because we are a product. So as we walked on our 2 feet and some of us came onto the other continent, our human evolution on our bipedal system is based on this what we ate. So we were early, not hunters and gatherers, we were gatherers. We gathered saprophytic system, particularly plant systems. So that ecology is very important. So is disease sensitivity suddenly made worse in a modern diet where we have super high carbohydrates and lipids that is then broken the system? And then we say all calories, we burn some food in a calorimeter and we say, oh, okay, one carbohydrate is 5 kilocalorie, but not all fructose is the same as glucose or these different sugars, not all the same. fructose is very differently burnt in our system versus glucose, right? Or lactose or any other sugar. So therefore, not all calories are the same. So not oligosaccharides. If you take oligosaccharides in a branch, they won't be digested in our system. But yet, if you burn it in a calorimeter, we'll say, oh, that's 5 kilocalorie, right? So we need to rethink this calorie model to a more ecological model, more oxygen function-based model. Because we do not have calorimeter to burn it in our body, it's the oxygen function that gives us the energy. Okay? So that cellular base is important, and we also find that nature is elegant. Nature, particularly plants, have developed multiple tools to counter this oxygen malfunction. And that's why the food from the diversity is important to counter this. So with this kind of logic, we now see that in a high refined diet environment, we see all the major diseases are oxygen malfunction, especially these inexpensive refined sugars. For example, 1 rupee rice is a classic example. And then in America, we have the subsidies on all the cheap foods for the Native Americans who die at average age of 57, have double the rates of cardiovascular and diabetes, and they die at 20 years less than an average American. Why? They are given the subsidized free food that is killing them. Okay? So we are doing the same to our poor. We are giving this subsidized food, subsidized oil, subsidized. So we need to rethink that we need to give them subsidized quality food, more dal, more of, we need to subsidize dal and the foods that are protected. So as we see this inexpensive food and hyper-processed food is giving rise to most of our chronic disease and all oxygen breakdown. And we can get very elegant solutions from nature because reproductive function of plant life and the adaptive function of plant life have bases in this redox protective pathways. So those solutions from understanding of biology can be brought into our redox balance. So for a long time, we have been looking at these components from diversity of food, and I'm a big fan of local diversity and local culture-specific food. So this culture-specific food, our old jawar, our old millets, and all these need to be brought back and consumed in the traditional form. But we can improve the efficiency and adaptability and how we prepare it, and there's nothing wrong in making whole food processed. Right? We need food technology so that the availability is year-round. We need low water consumption strategies. So nothing wrong with technology, but don't lose cultural specificity and food and the technology to preserve that. So ecology has to be brought into our food, and therefore we have found many classes of compounds, particularly the biphenolics, simple phenolics. They all have role in our biology. So we go after this biology in the plant system and bring it into our food chain. And we have many methods of screening them, single seed clonal lines that have better regulatory structure for the secondary compounds that are protective. We have stress adaptive mechanism where we trigger the secondary responses to enrich some of these protective compounds. We have microbial, we look at traditional fermentation of the world. In fact, we are building this fermentation process not only as a food preservation traditional food system, but as a source of our microbiome. Fermented food, idli, vada, dosa, dokla, all of this has been a source of fermented food. So we need to bring that back into our food system with better understanding of the biochemistry. And therefore, microbial-based processing, our yogurts and all sorts of combination from it are some of the best ways for us to bring back the good bacteria in our system, but also preserve them more elegantly. Okay. So with this kind of strategy, here's a classic good example. Everyone talks of the French paradox, where the French eat the same amount of fat as the Americans, but have lower cardiovascular disease, mainly because the French have resveratrol in their wine. But if you eat tulsi, or if you eat mint, pudina, or if you eat Thai basil, which is sort of a variation of the tulsi, or oregano, it has also the biphenolics which can do the same function as resveratrol. We have ellagic acid. So we have our wonderful curcumin, which is highly methylated, but still it runs proton gates and can trigger the pentose phosphate pathway. So it need not have high radical scavenging, but yet it can trigger many of the protective pathways. So these biphenolics in nature are elegant compounds in order to turn on our protective oxygen redox control points. Okay? So we want to bring such foods into our diet. Our sprouts are amazing. All our legumes should be bought back. Horse gram and mung bean and black gram. So should not, all our tradition, particularly these dryland legumes that need very little water, they're very adaptable and they are very rich in these protective compounds. So what's wrong in having a little lower yield when they can give high level of protective compounds? Why should we always have only high yields of starch or sugar? We should have high yields of across the system. So we need to adapt. And so to make many years story into one, plants very elegantly make secondary compounds to not only derive the energy, but partition some of the energy towards protective compounds, particularly the pentose phosphate pathway, because they need phosphorylated reductants like NADPH and sugar phosphate to not only make the compounds for protection, but also make the precursors that protect against the oxygen malfunction from breaking down, particularly the reactive oxygen species where the atom and the 8 atoms have to, the 6 atoms have to be stabilized, then the enzymatic system also counters them along with the phenolics. So this logic needs to be brought in from plant growth to fermentation into our human diet. So we've applied this to type 2 diabetes, and today it's the most rapidly growing disease on the planet, and India is faced with this. And so what we have done is now this number is also going up now. It's about 500 million plus, and in India it'll affect about 10 to 12% of our population. It's already so. And the US it's already about 10, but pre-diabetes is about 90 million already out of a population of 325 million. And India is growing more rapidly because we are largely a vegetarian society eating a lot more hyper-processed carbohydrates. So this is a serious challenge, and what we have found is that nature is well endowed with inhibitors of slowing the glucose absorption and giving insulin more time. So the lot of inhibitors of amylase and glucosidase, so that such foods, not only they make you full with oligosaccharides and these inhibitors, they won't let you eat. So if you eat a salad very early, then you won't eat much. Your stomach feels satiety. Okay, and then you'll get these inhibitors. So you're not going to eat too much of other hyper-processed food. So these inhibitors have to be bought both as a food design, but also that's why the culinary arts vision of this symbiosis is very important. And ultimately, delivery is through how you prepare. So if they prepare foods with a lot of these inhibitors from a whole range of foods, it's the chefs and the hotels and the restaurants that needs to then deliver these foods in a health. They become your doctors, yeah, with the nutritionists and doctors working with them. Okay, so that is the future that you see here. And so we see that complications, beta cell function, they all can have a cognates from the food that we eat. Blood pressure management, the ACE inhibitors widely spread in food. Alpha glucosidase inhibitors widely felt. Beta cell function modulation, there are a lot of TDZ type modulators in legumes. So food is full of it. So we search for these, and also how glucose versus fructose we have to manage. So if you look at our food, for example, there are enough example of our highland rice or non-white rice species that are very high levels of phenolic and free radical scavenging, but also inhibitors of our digestive enzymes. So they need to be brought back. Some of our traditional highland rices of, the whole grain, we eat this boiled rice. So they are from the highland rice. They need to be brought back. And they can be bred into our IR varieties and other Jaya and other varieties. But we can breed more of the oligosaccharides and the protective compounds, but still focus on yields. But we can bring all these protective elements, not just focus on starch only, or quick digestive starch, but more slow digesting starch along with these oligosaccharides. So nature is endowed with this. We need to bring that back. We can see this in the mint family, pudina, tulsi, oregano, rosemary. They're full of all of this. Good compound. ACE inhibitors are very common. And we have studied this, particularly in North Dakota, we have a lot of indigenous communities. We are interested in showing that the indigenous crops on a 2,000 calorie base has more protective elements than the refined foods that they're getting. High, lipids, the oil and refined sugar, refined, all these refined foods from which they make their fry bread is devoid of all of this. So when we look at the three sister crop of the Native Americans, it's very rich in ACE inhibitors, the blood pressure modulators. So if you just make a good pumpkin soup with P5 or P1, you're going to get ACE inhibitors instead of getting ACE inhibitors as a drug. You can reduce that dose with combination of such foods. And same thing, we are looking at Peruvian Andean. I have students, whenever students come from other parts of the country, I force them to study their own food. And here is a student from Peru. She studied this Andean grains, especially when Andean native people come to Lima, Peru, on the coast, they eat all the rubbish foods. So when they go back to their traditional foods, they're very rich in some of these protective elements. So we go, same thing with the bean cultivars. India, we make so many preparations with eggplant and dal. Eggplant has roots in India. So why not we refine that with our diabetes problem? Okay, so there are many local eggplant. There's one variety in Udupi called Mettugulla. It's a temple food. And somebody realized whenever people go to the temple, when they visit the Manipal hospital, their sugar load goes down. So they're wondering why. But they're eating temple food because they don't want to go to hotels, because Udupi temple gives free food. And that free food is made from Mettugulla. And then Mettugulla with dal is a very sugar reducer. And so when they go back to the hospital after the food, the sugar is down. So they were wondering why, what is this? And the doctors are shocked because they never taken a nutrition course. Right? They still say, oh, macronutrients, that, this, and they're giving diabetes pills and then they're feeding all the rubbish food side by side. Right? So that is the tragedy of modern medicine, is we give all this metformin and other solutions, and then next door the food that is served is still making the sickness worse. Right? So we need, eggplant is a good solution for both pulp. We find these fermented processing is a very good example. We can develop like soy yogurts with blueberry that can be inhibitors. And so modern beverages can be redesigned to meet our needs. And therefore, some of my students have worked on this. We are looking at soy cranberry-based probiotic drinks. Not only you get the probiotic, but you get the inhibitors. So technology is not the problem, but how do we integrate these ecological principles into technology is the solution. We have had even fermented apple juice with both probiotics and as well as these hyperglycemia modulating compounds. So we have worm models to test this. We have a worm, we cut the head goes back, planaria. And this is a beautiful stem cell model, because now you put oxidative pressure and the head does not grow back nicely. Then you put your good compound and the head grows back nicely. So what happens to the metabolic function is a very good, because ultimately food is an equilibrium concept. We need to heal with food. So that means we have to kill dead cells, apoptosis, and let good cells come up. Okay? So that's the base of food. Food is preventive, constantly revitalizing yourself. So food is not a drug. Food has to revitalize. So we need an apoptosis model to design our food, the equilibrium model. So that's why we looked at a stem cell model. Your dead cells go away, that's a stem cell answer back to give you the revitalization, right? So that's why we looked at that model. So using that model, we have gone to study the redox compounds of many of the compounds we screen. And therefore, we go back to this metabolic logic, and ultimately, metabolism is a product of your ecology. So don't forget that. Don't just focus on genes or its components and how they work. They're all important. But ultimately, how we respond to our ecology is central. And therefore, this whole food strategy is also elegant, because when we think of Gandhian rural development, imagine we build a local value-added agriculture based on local food system that even gives value to the local taluk and district. Yeah? So food distribution and transportation system, if it's elegantly built within that, it can provide a national platform for decentralization that's local value added. So you have a soil health to human health strategy for economic development. And this model is very elegantly can be applied into Africa. I've been to Rwanda and in West Africa, Ghana. So their problems are just like our problems. And so we can work, and across Southeast Asia, we can look at this. But why them? Everywhere in the world, we need this rural decentralization to better integrate economic solutions. And therefore, we have what this redox biology platform, from plant growth to proven effectiveness for human health and public health, that can be designed into the rural economy. So 5 more minutes and I'm done. And so what I'm trying to address is, do not forget we are products of our ecology. Do not forget that we have to live within the rules of this planet.